Blog Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and I'm very glad you're joining us again today. Today we're going to have another very interesting show. We're going to be speaking with a writer and producer and essentially filmmaker of a very special film that I have seen at this point a couple of times called People versus the State of Illusion, Austin Vickers. And we'll get to him in a moment. For those of you who listen with any regularity, you know that we are always looking to uncover, if not discover, the themes, the values, the importance of bringing our lives to a higher level of awareness, a higher level of consciousness, of greater understanding of the mechanisms of how we work internally and then how that gets projected outward into our world, to the world that we know and value so much externally. And there's such an interesting, delicate, intricate relationship between the two. So when we talk about creating a better world, we're always facing the inner subject, inner ecology I like to refer to it as well as outer ecology, and looking at how one reflects the other and how we build one through the other. And it doesn't appear that way. It doesn't seem. There's nothing in our early education that actually puts us into that mode of thinking. But upon greater reflection, meditation, metaphysical understanding psychology in the ways of the mind and body, we come to see that, in fact, we do very much shape our lives from the inside out. And that will really be the underlying theme of today's conversation with Austin Vickers. And this very much reiterates the kind of subject that we so like to discuss here on A Better World. For those of you who do not yet get our weekly newsletter, a free newsletter called The Better World Newsletter, just go to our website at www.abetterworld.tv, and that's also where you can listen to the show as well as our weekly television show every Tuesday night at 10:30 on New York City Manhattan Cable Network. So I'm so glad you're joining us, and please forward the website to your friends so they too can tune in. On the level of notes, I also want to let you know that at the end of this show, we may be joined by the wonderful man, the producer of New York City Expos, as well as in Fort Lauderdale and elsewhere, Mark Becker, to describe his show coming up in New York City this weekend at the Pennsylvania Hotel, the Raw Food and Yoga Expo. I'll be speaking there. I might be moderating a panel or two as well. So please go to our website where we have all of this listed, and you can learn more about it. And if Mark joins us, you'll learn more from the horse's mouth. Okay. So a couple of words about this film will be the subject of today's show. People versus the State of Illusion is called a compelling exploration into the power and science of our imagination. Several people had some very nice comments about it. For instance, want to change your life? This movie might inspire you. I think it's a little mild. I think it will inspire you. That was from Scientific American, but they're scientists. They need to be a little conservative, I guess. A little less conservative and definitely pungent is the Huffington Post, who said an enlightening film, and the real critic called it a must-see. And I would agree with all of that, as well as the New Consciousness Review, who said you will want to see it multiple times. So without further ado, I will introduce you all to Austin Vickers, who is this is his first venture as a filmmaker, but has had a life as a criminal attorney and as an executive coach, working largely with different Fortune 500 corporations and helping them shape and think through any number of different issues with which they may be grappling. So, Austin, it's a pleasure to have you on today's show.
Hi, Mitchell. Thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be on the show and get to talk about imagination. It's my favorite subject.
Yes, indeed. Sure, I understand why. And I feel you really used your imagination full out here in this film, Austin. It really is very good. I met you last in New York City about a year ago when you were doing a screening here, and I was so pleased that a friend called me up and told me that I should definitely be there, and I had an open evening, and voila, I'm so glad I was there because I felt you did an excellent job in this relatively new genre that was really kicked off by What the Bleep Do We Know, and then followed by others. But I feel you have made a new stamp, a new imprimatur on quality of both hitting a stride of interviews with, really eminent professionals in the field of neuroscience and the like, and telling a story. And that's really admirable how you hit that middle ground there with the two of them.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I mean, that obviously was one of our intent in making the film was, to take some of this leading-edge science and develop some of the concepts and ideas that some people had a little bit of exposure to prior, but take it a little bit deeper. Sure. And, of course, tie it into a story that would hopefully be emotionally compelling, and I think we achieved that.
I really do. I really do, too. Tell us a little bit about the story, and also, I mean, as a lawyer, is this a story that you, a real-life situation that you hopped into, or tell us the story, if you would.
Well, it's a story about a guy named Aaron Roberts who, through a series of events and judgments and perceptions in the way he sees the world, finds himself in prison. And then, of course, it's a story of what happens to him while he's in prison and the kind of the transformation that he goes through. And the story is really very metaphorical to kind of the trial, of course, that we all go through in lives and the prisons that we often find ourselves in, which can create limitations in our life. And those prison walls, often people will feel that way, whether it's a relationship or their work or sometimes any of the circumstances or situations of their life. And so we kind of draw that metaphorical analogy between the prison that Aaron's in throughout the course of the movie and then document that with the research and the scientists who talk about the prisons that we create in our own mind and how those prisons are created and ultimately how do we escape them.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I feel like you really did that well. But one wonders, of course, as one watches, Austin, you especially as a lawyer, and the way you frame it at the beginning, it sounds like this was a man, of course it's enacted, but this was a man that you knew, or certainly the girl who didn't want to go into foster care so she could remain in relationship with her father. It sounded like it was truly a true story.
Well, one of the reasons, I built the film in the way that I did is because in my work with people over the last 15 years, what I've always noticed is that people have a very difficult time self-analyzing and looking at their own issues. I mean, our egos are very clever, and our egos build these very elaborate defenses that help to obscure some of our patterns and our issues, and then, of course, keep us locked into these personas and the stories that we have about ourselves. Yeah. So one of the techniques I've always used in working with people or organizations is to help them identify those issues by externalizing the issue. Rather than asking somebody, what's an issue that you struggle with, I might ask them the question, well, what's a characteristic or behavior of a person that, bothers you or creates an emotional response in you that you've seen show up in your life consistently since you were kind of born? And whatever that issue is that people identify externally is usually always an issue that they're dealing with themselves. But by asking them a question in an external way, it allows them to identify it without having the ego feel threatened at that point. I mean, we obviously take it a little deeper and ultimately tie it back to them. But at least in diagnosing some of the issues, that's a really effective technique. And I wanted to use that technique in the film as well. So the characters of the film are very metaphorical to the kinds of roles that we play. And, for example, a little girl, her name is Hope. And, of course, that's just, for me, a way of symbolizing how I view hope. It's very fragile, like a young girl is, that needs to be protected and nurtured.
Yes.
And I look at hope exactly the same way, that if we aren't careful with hope and we don't nurture our hope and put hope in an environment where it is safe and can be pursued, then often many of us find our hopes diminished, and then a whole host of problems can occur as a result of that.
Yes, indeed. I understand. But when you say, I appreciate the metaphorical level, but and this isn't that important, I don't want to harp on it, but were the characters drawn from real life people with whom you've dealt in your profession as a lawyer?
Not specifically, no. But
like an amalgam? Okay.
Yes, more of a characters and roles of individuals that I was never a criminal lawyer. I was a business lawyer, so I didn't represent people in criminal trials.
My mistake. Sorry about that. Yeah.
But they clearly represent the kind of roles that we all play, at different times in our lives, and that's really more what it's meant to communicate.
Yes, indeed. Well, it really does, and you have a stellar group of people, several of whom I know quite well and have interviewed and been friendly with, such as Dr. Joe Dispenza and Debbie Ford. I've also known quite well, and I just love this group of people that you've had on. Brenda Dunn of Princeton with Dr. Robert John. I mean, you are really uncovering some really interesting perspectives. Speak a little bit about that, what you wanted to bring to light in the film in this respect.
Well, I was trying to do two things. One, I wanted to include people in the film who had all touched me in one shape or form or another, their work, or I'd read their books, or so I literally and specifically chose people with whom I'd had a personal experience, and my life had been influenced by their work. And then secondly, I wanted to bring really some of the leading experts from different fields of study. So, for example, you mentioned Brenda and Robert John. I'm real pioneers in the world of physics. I mean, Robert John was essentially the guy who put rocket ships on the moon for NASA. So a real heavyweight as former dean of engineering at Princeton University in the world of physics. Candace Pert, former chief of neuroscience with the National Institute of Health. And one of the foremost medical researchers in the country.
Author of The Molecules of Emotion, which I love. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, great book. And so her and Joe Dispenza both speak and teach extensively in the fields of neuroscience. Dr. Thomas Moore from the world of psychology, probably one of the most preeminent psychotherapists in the country. His book, Care of the Soul, was number one on the New York Times bestseller list for close to 2 years. He's written 20-plus books in the area of psychology and culture and the arts. So, Debbie Ford is a leader in emotional intelligence and emotional
Sure.
awareness. So the list kind of goes on and on. Peter Senge from the world of business wrote one of the best-selling
MIT
books of all time. Yeah, MIT professor. So, I really tried to find a nice cross-section of experts, all from a number of different fields of study that would all really speak to the subject in an informative and substantive way.
Yes. Well, I really feel like you again hit that note. It's becoming quite an orchestration. I'd love to dig in, Austin, to some of the content of the film, and you make a striking comment at the beginning by quoting the statistic that more people die from suicide than from all of the armed conflicts in the world. That's a very powerful statement.
It really is, and I think it sometimes gets lost. I mean, I think a lot of us see on the news every day, of course, all of the conflicts and the wars that are going on around the world and the mass amounts of people that are dying from those wars. And yet, perhaps the biggest war of all, certainly in terms of the loss of life, comes from people who give up hope and people who are so affected negatively and perceptually by the stress and the traumas in their lives that they literally feel like death is a better option than living. And, that's, for me, a tragedy that is really a tragedy of education. It's really people who don't understand what's possible for themselves, how much accountability and responsibility they really have to be imaginative, what role imagination plays in their experience of life, and even if they are feeling traumatized by the circumstances or events of their life, how it's possible to change, how it's possible to evolve out of that situation by perceiving and imagining in different ways. And that's, of course, what the whole film is about.
Yes, exactly. Sure, no, I agree with you. It really all pivots on education, both later, and I would even love to say if we could get this kind of education, psychological, emotional education, where, the great work of emotional intelligence has given us such a gift of expanding our fixation on the IQ as the only measure of intelligence. It couldn't be further from the truth. As is said in your film, we are all ultimately emotional beings, and peculiar as it is, and as much as we may want to pride ourselves on our strong intellects, it's our emotional life, our reactive life, our perceptual life/belief system that really governs the way we experience moment-to-moment reality. So it gives us a leverage, right? That's one of the points you keep making in the film, Joe Dispenza, Candace Pert, everyone does, that we get our leverage from the imagination. And part of the imagination is a reframe of what it is that is before us.
There's no question. There's no question about that. In fact, Time Magazine did a really interesting article before the turn of the century, looking back over 100 years and saying who was the most important person in that 100-year period who'd affected life on planet Earth the most from their knowledge and their contribution to the body of knowledge. And the person they identified and put on the cover of that magazine, of course, was Albert Einstein, who's really noted as probably one of the most brilliant, bastions of knowledge that this planet has ever had. And yet, even by his own words, he's often quoted as saying, imagination is more important than knowledge. And that's because he understood the role that imagination plays in everything, in our day-to-day existence. I mean, we grossly underestimate what we're imagining. We think everything that we experience and see around us is a function of observation, and it's largely not. It's mostly a function of imagination.
Yes, exactly. And one of the segments that you bring forward in the film, which I would love to share with our audience, and maybe you can go on about it, is the two scientific experiments which show not only the power of the mind and the power of imagination, but the way our minds actually interact with the inanimate world around us, even such things as computers and machines. And I think that's just utterly brilliant science. And one of the things that Einstein showed us all is the role of imagination in science. So, I'd love to hear
there's
your
no
speak on
question. Yeah, there's no question. I mean, one of the great learnings we've had in the last 40 to 50 years, of course, has been the advancement of quantum physics. And what we learned from quantum physics, of course, is that while many differences appear at the level of observation that we're capable of, and looking, at our clothes and our computers and our friends and our people, we see distinguishing elements of our world. But when you boil all of those things down and take them down to a quantum level, what we actually see is relative unanimity. And we start to see at the quantum level that energy, although, of course, it will manifest itself different in terms of vibration, the essential building blocks of matter and energy are very, very similar. And there is what we now refer to often as what's called a unified field. Well,
Yes.
And this is a field of energy that exists at a subatomic level that affects all aspects of life and does bind together both matter with that's in living organisms with inanimate objects. And so based on that science, there's been a lot of research done, and we document some of that in the film. And the study you're referring to, which I really love, and it was a study that I actually first found out about. I was living in England at the time about 20 years ago, and I attended a lecture by a Cambridge University professor by the name of Rupert Sheldrake, who was talking about morphic fields and talking about kind of this resonance that occurs at a quantum level. And he drew reference in his talk to the work of a French researcher by the name of René Piaget. And the study that we included in the film was a study that was done with baby chicks to test whether or not the intentions and beliefs of a baby chick can affect an inanimate object like a machine or a computer robot. And so he built this test study for showing this, which we document in the film, and proved that, in fact, baby chicks, the intention of baby chicks to be close to something that they believe that it's its mother, will actually affect the movements of a random movement generator that's buried into a robot. And what's so fascinating about that study, I think, of course, is that baby chicks don't even know they're in a research study. They're just operating from this fundamental emotional response of wanting to be close to their mother, and because of that deep-seated intention and belief and emotional response, it was shown to affect the random movements, basically causing a random movement generator to move non-randomly.
Well, and to move closer to the chicks that were creating a resonance field, or, of course, as Sheldrake would call it, a morphogenetic field, around the machine that it was perceiving as its mother.
Yes.
But it's awesome. It's awesome. So, when people get into their cars, for instance, and the car doesn't start, they can now, after reviewing the science, have a sense that if they think differently, they might actually be able to influence the nature of the car starting.
Yeah, but one of the things that we talk about, and it brings up a really important point, because I think a lot of people, for example, saw a film like The Secret and said, I've set an intention to find that parking spot or to have a check show up in my mailbox or to affect my computer, and nothing happens. Yeah, so I don't really believe in this whole law of attraction stuff. And, as I watched that film and have talked to audiences for the last couple of years, what has become very apparent to me is that there's a deep misunderstanding around the science on this subject. And people think that it's conditioned only upon your intention. but it's really not. I mean, one of the things that the chick experiment shows us, it's not just the fact that these baby chicks had an intention to be by their mother. They had a deep emotionally held belief that the robot was its mother. And as a result, their intention was a reflection of a deeper seated belief. And the combination of those two things is what caused the effect on the machines. If somebody has an intention, for example, to be positive in their life, it's often because they have a mountain of negativity that lies below it, and they're using that intention as a way of grappling with or kind of dealing with that negativity. And so one of the things that I always, tell people is, look, it matters why you have the intention. The intention is one thing, but we need to understand, why do you have that intention? And for example, if you set an intention to get $100,000 because you feel like your life you can't move forward with the minimal amount of money that you have, or that you, in order to have your dreams come true, you need $100,000, then your belief system isn't founded in abundance. It's actually founded in a lack of abundance. And that belief that you lack abundance and that you don't have already in your life everything that you need is going to be a much more powerful effect on the environment around you than the simple intention that you may have to, affect your car or affect the computer, if you don't truly believe that those things are even possible. And so it's very, very important for people to educate themselves as to those possibilities, and then really question the nature of their beliefs and get to a point where they fully, have an alignment between their founding beliefs and the intentions that they set for themselves.
Yes. Oh, I appreciate the point, and I don't want anyone to think that it's a purely linear causal relationship between one's mood and a car starting or not starting. I think that would be way overly reductionistic and simplistic. That's not at all what I mean. But at the same time, I would question about knowing what a chick's belief system actually is. So, we could analyze this inside and out and still end up not sure. But what we do observe is that there is this relationship between our minds, between our emotions, and the field that gets generated from them, and the so-called outside world and the way that world responds to us. I mean, after all, it's part of Heisenberg's principle in quantum physics about the observer affecting the observed. So this is considered utterly fundamental quantum mechanics. It's not, while I am not a big fan of The Secret, I think that it also articulates just a little way too simple-mindedly this notion of the law of attraction, but there's also the law of repulsion, and there's also an entire subconscious reality, which I feel you were referring to. What is the actual makeup of my being that is the fundamental building blocks of my perception and my belief systems? And if all of that is not in some form of unified field, then the effectiveness of anybody's intention is going to be rather whimsical. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. There's no doubt about that. But on a side note, I will say that we actually do know a little bit about the belief system of baby chicks, because there's a process called imprinting that is well documented.
Oh, that's for sure, yes.
That tells us, of course, that when you hatch a baby chick next to an object like a dog or even a computer robot, that it imprints on that object.
It will imprint, right.
It believes that object is its mother. And so, and that's been documented by a lot of research that shows the behavior of baby chicks that are in alignment with that belief. So that's why we know, for example, that the intention to be close to its mother that was done in the experiment is in alignment with its fundamental belief that object is its mother, and therefore we see the effect.
Yes, exactly. And, of course, ducklings are the other famous other little type of animal that we learned that about as well. We are speaking with Austin Vickers, who is the writer, producer, and essentially filmmaker of the conceiver of this really excellent film that I would really recommend you get the DVD of. It's been on PBS, and it's beginning to spread around more local PBS stations, but it can also be gotten at our website, People versus the State of Illusion, at abetterworld.tv, and you can order right there from the website. It's really strong.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say the advantage. I was going to say the advantage of getting the DVD is, of course, that we have an extra hour of footage on that DVD over and above what was shown on the PBS special.
Oh, is that so? I didn't know that. Great to know. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a really extensive Q&A session that takes the science much deeper with each one of the scientists in the film.
And, you know, there's another piece to it, Austin, which is that I've seen this film now 3 times, and I believe that it is in my future, and I have the hope that I will be seeing it again and showing it to people, because it really packs a punch in terms of the quality of the speakers, the science, and the narrative. It's really, I was really studying it last night in preparation for our interview today, and I got to say, I really feel like it was very well thought through and very well pieced together. So unlike a lot of these talking heads films and documentaries, which, by the way, I think are generally great, do tend to get a little repetitive. And you call it a docudrama, the narrative part of it really engages the viewer. It really is a story that does need to be told, and you really tell it well, surrounded by the science that sort of buttresses it. So,
well, I appreciate you saying that, and I think, you know, the reason that was important, I think, to do is because that's the real world experience that we all have. I mean,
exactly.
It's one thing to understand this stuff from a scientific standpoint, for those of us who are into it, but, you know, most of us live a very emotional type experience day to day, and I think one of the, you know, concerns that, or not concerns, but I think one of the takeaways I got from watching What the Bleep 10 years ago when it first came out and other films like that was, okay, but how does this practically apply to my life? Like, you know, what actions can I take, and how would it show up in our day-to-day existence? And that's what we wanted to try to show in the narrative of the film. Yes.
And I believe you did. You know, the interactions for you folks who have not yet seen it, but I trust will. You know, Aaron Roberts is in jail. He's very much a very regular person. I don't know if he's a computer programmer or something of that sort, and a single dad, and finds himself in this unbelievably difficult situation where he essentially is put into jail, and as a result, he's losing his lovely 10 or 11-year-old daughter, and he's locked up for something very serious, a criminal offense, and he's staring at 4 walls. And I don't want to go into it too much, but he develops relationships with a couple of the folks in the prison, and they become mirrors for him to begin to see. I mean, one way of putting it, especially since I just had my dear friend Bruce Lipton on the show very recently, who just wrote a book, Austin, called The Honeymoon Effect, The Science of Creating Heaven on Earth. And
I saw that.
You saw that, yeah. And you could say that one of the people that he starts dealing with is showing him the hell, and the other is reflecting back the potential of heaven. And so I feel like, right, you did that very artfully. I'd love to hear you talk about one of the things that you know, a point you're making, and you were making again just about the chick's science. I mean, in some way, our psychology isn't, and our imprinting of our own nervous system isn't that different from chicks. And so could you talk a little bit about what you've learned on your journey about the imprinting of our nervous system and our mind, our psyches, early on, and how malleable is it, with our notions of neuroplasticity and the like, as time goes on?
Well, I mean, we've learned a great deal, especially in the last 10 years, and of course, Bruce Lipton is great. He's contributed a lot to epigenetics and a lot of what we're learning today in terms of neurobiology. But when I was growing up as a kid, our parents often said, don't you dare smoke pot, or because you're born with a certain amount of brain cells and that's it. And once you die, that's once you've used them up, that's kind of the end of the road for you.
That's your allotment.
Exactly. And of course, it did a very effective job on some of us, scaring us into, avoiding those kinds of behaviors. But we know that's not true today. I mean, the brain is extremely malleable. Although, of course, when we're born and we inherit genetic neural network from our parents, from the day that we're born and raised. And maybe in a cruel trick of nature, we get socialized in that very same dysfunctional environment for the next 20 years of our lives just to make sure those patterns are really hardwired. But I like to joke with people, there's an old saying, whenever you're feeling enlightened, go spend 2 weeks with your family, because
exactly.
They have a tendency to really trigger many of our issues. But look, the good news is twofold. One, we certainly have the way and the ability to make our way out of it. We certainly know that's possible. But I think one of the hard parts for people to grasp is that it really takes an effort. The example I always use, it's like playing the violin. If I called on most people in an audience watching my film to come up to the center of the stage and I put a violin in their hand and I said, play the violin for everybody. What most people would experience, of course, who've never played a violin before, is they would feel a great amount of anxiety and discomfort, because neurologically what would be going on is that the brain wouldn't know what to do. It doesn't have a neural network formed for playing the violin. It's new territory. And so there's nothing going on inside that human's brain that allows it to very easily pick up and hold the violin and know how to hold the violin and how to play the bow on it. And so when a brain is kind of adventuring into new territory, anxiety and discomfort are actually some of the earmarks of the emotional response to that brain going into new ground. And yet, for many of us, that causes us to want to shy away from the behavior. But if we will work past that and deal with those feelings of pain and anxiety and discomfort, and of course practice the behavior, then we know that, after a couple of years, the person could get kind of proficient about it. After 5 years, they might even be able to perform locally. And if they continue it for 10 years, they can actually become a master of that new behavior of playing the violin. Well, the exact same thing is true of any kind of pattern of thinking that we want to embark on. So even if we've mastered guilt in our lives, or we've become a master of suffering or anxiety or fear, if we learn to establish new patterns of thinking and we are willing to be patient and make our way through the anxiety and the discomfort that comes from that new way of thinking, and we're willing to habituate the practice for a long period of time, we can make our way out of this stuff. And you can literally see a reorganization of the neural network in a brain under a microscope, and that's been documented. So to that, we talk about extensively in the film, and I think that's one of the reasons why we, at least, or I draw the conclusion, there's an enormous amount of hope in the idea that our brains our perceptions are subject to reprogramming through, perceptual changes.
Yes, exactly. Very important, very important. Otherwise, when you talk about hope, what hope would there be? I mean, one of the things that, Bruce Lipton helps to highlight is the the fallacy of the Genome Project, actually, which gives you this notion of a genetic destiny. And, so sadly for Angelina Jolie and her husband, she lived that story. And without getting, let's just say, the fuller education that she would have gotten had she listened to A Better World radio or TV or seen the film People versus the State of Illusion, because it is an illusion that it goes that way. We are, and one of the salient points, of course, you make in the film, Austin, is that we really can be the captains of our own ship. That doesn't mean we control the entirety of our destiny. That would be foolhardy. That would be sort of like the magical thinking that you were referring to, which arose from the film The Secret. This false hope, you could say. It's just kind of silliness at a certain point. So it is there too. We don't control all elements of all things at all times. That's absurd. But we can move from the victim role to the master role, and because we can be controlling and have a hand in our reactions to the outside world. So we're no longer so subject, as Joe Dispenza was saying, to the external conditions of our lives. And, all real teachers say that in one way or another, whether it's a guru from the East or a science teacher in the West,
Yeah, there's no question about that. I mean, I remember learning that lesson for the first time by a great writer. I'm sure you're familiar with Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Happiness. He talks about being
in search of meaning. Yeah.
Yep, and he talks about being in a concentration camp, and he said, obviously we didn't choose these circumstances for ourselves, but every day we have the ability to choose how to respond to them and what meaning to attach to it. And that's the point. I mean, I think, random things do, I believe, occur in the world, and, events happen that can be very challenging and trying for us, but we always get to choose the meaning that we attach to them. We always get to choose the response that we have to them. And if we choose a response and a meaning that is in alignment with a greater purpose that we have for ourselves, a greater vision and imagination that's inspiring, then that's what will get reflected. And, we start to attract those kinds of people and more of those circumstances into our lives, and we really can create the results that we experience because of that meaning and choice that we get to make.
Really, really true, really true. Another kind of a strong point that you made in the film that I also very much appreciated, because my work as I'm a holistically oriented psychotherapist. I mean, after all, I really met you 20-some-odd years ago through your folks, and the herbal company they set up back then that I got introduced to. And so my work as a therapist, an acupuncturist, and stress management consultant and coach involves nutrition, as well as looking at any number of different environmental factors, and needless to say, the internal landscape, too, of our lives and what creates health, what creates well-being, what creates wellness. And so that domain between the stress on the inside and the stress caused on the outside is a very important one, I think, to any kind of practitioner or anyone who's seeking to help others deal with emotional, mental, and physical well-being. And your point that 50% of, and maybe you can help me with this, I'm trying to decipher my own difficult Greek-looking handwriting, 50% of deaths are due, I think the APA said this, the American Psychological Association, due to social and behavioral problems related to stress.
Yeah, they actually went back and analyzed the death certificates of every human being that has died in the United States over the last 100 years. And
really?
and trace back the causes behind all of those deaths, and that was their statistic, that over 50% of those deaths were actually preventable deaths because they were rooted in behavioral or social factors, the majority of which, of course, revolved around stress. And that's, Candace Pert talks at length about that in her book, Molecules of Emotion. Mm-hmm. When our receptors get bombarded with these emotional responses that often people have to things like stress, it starts to affect all of the receptors and the behavior of the cell, so that even if we're receiving the exact nutrients that we need, the cell's not able to absorb them because the receptor sites for the nutrients get replaced by receptor sites for these molecules of emotion, and they start to inundate the cell, so that despite our nutritional habits and behaviors, the cell can't process nutrients and build proteins the way it used to because it's so inundated with these molecules of emotion, which is really fascinating. And I think it reiterates your point, which is not only do we have to care about our nutrients and nutrition, but boy, if we're not taking care of our emotional health and our psychological health, then we're going to be in trouble.
You got it. I'm writing an article now for the Huffington Post, which is on the subject of the medicalization of our society. And everyone has, one type of disease or another, and they almost boast it like it's a banner of some strange sort, Certainly for me, who grew up without dealing with doctors at all, and I continued that through my entire adult life. And I don't even as a practicing therapist and coach and acupuncturist, I never really learned the medical nomenclature because I felt I don't even want to know it. It sounds funny, but there's a part of me that knows that people from different parts of the world, different indigenous groups, different tribes, etc., don't even know what we're talking about when we talk about different kinds of cancer, for instance, or arthritis. They don't have heart disease. They don't know them. They don't have them because, number one, they don't have the stress that we have. Whatever stress they have, and they've got stress. I mean, having to, hunt for food and the like, that has its own stress. But there's a way of dealing with it that is outside of our kind of concrete urban jungle in which we were raised in one way or another. Even just the media, even if we live on a farm, but we watch, Sex in the City, we get our nose stuck into this kind of medicalized life where people are suffering like mad. And so it's very powerful, that point you raise in the film, quoting the APA's work in this regard. It gives us way more leverage over what's possible and our dealing with what are considered, life-threatening disease with our mind and our commitment and our discipline and our willingness to work with ourselves and our own sense of self-love, compassion, gentleness, self-respect. All, by the way, are points that you really raise well in the film. So
thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, and it's it's interesting because, as you note, I mean, one of the an area that I think reinforces what you just discussed and stated is I've done a little research around MPD patients, people who have multiple personality disorders.
Yes.
And there are indications in the literature that and some studies that have been done to document the physiological differences that can occur in an MPD patient depending on what personality is in control.
Yes.
And things like visual acuity. One personality needs glasses and another one doesn't, or one personality needs diabetes and another one doesn't, or there was a case reported where one woman had 3 menstrual periods, one for each one of her different, personality types.
Yes,
and what's
yes,
fascinating me about that research and the study is that it's the same physiological person. The only difference is their psychological viewpoint in terms of how they're seeing themselves, which of course is different for each personality. But based on that perception, there are great differences that can occur in terms of our anatomy and our physiology. I mean, almost shocking to the point where even in some cases, things like tumors or scars go away. Or eye color changes. And so, and that highlights the point that imagination plays even a very significant role in the formation of our body on a day-to-day basis.
Truly. Exactly. That's such a good point. And I know I'm familiar with some of the research, and, sometimes one of the personalities of a multiple personality, as it's called, disorder, but I actually think that we're all multiple personalities, so I don't want to call it a disorder, although it can be, of course. But one of the personalities can be a doctor or a nurse or a healer and heal the other parts of the person,
Yeah. Well, and you're actually right. I mean, in the research on MPD patients, we are all MPD. We all essentially have that condition. The only difference is either by genetics or accident, there's a mechanism in the brain that allows the transition between personalities to be conscious or not. And with most of us, that is intact. And so we're conscious when our personalities change and we go into different moods. But in an MPD patient, because of birth defect or accident, they lose that transition, and therefore that's what causes the quote-unquote disorder.
Yes, exactly. Or the name of the pathology, definitely. Well, anyway, listen, Austin Vickers, I want to just thank you for being a guest on our show today and for doing this great work that you've done. I feel it's a real gift to people, this film, People versus, and I love the name, by the way, especially you as a lawyer as well, People versus the State of Illusion. I really think that's very clever. I really liked it from the beginning. It really brings us into the courtroom, but also goes, whoa, wait a minute, let's look at illusion there and everywhere else. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Mitchell. Thank you for having me on the show. This has been a great conversation, man. It's always a pleasure. Getting to talk to you and having a conversation like this is a highlight of the week for sure.
I'm so glad. Give us your website.
And then I live on the beach here in Long Beach.
My website is www.austinvickers.com.
Okay, great. And we do have your video on our website, abetterworld.tv. So any of you who are listening, do go and check this out. It's money very well spent, and I would really recommend that you watch it with your loved ones, your family, your friends, and even organize groups to sit down and hold discussions afterwards, because it's really going to hit you in your gut, and it's really going to educate your brain and gut. So really tune in. Austin, thanks again for joining us, and I'll speak with you soon.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Mitchell.
Sure, my pleasure. That was Austin Vickers, the filmmaker, the writer and producer of this film. We spent the show speaking about People versus the State of Illusion. And truly, I really do recommend it. And that's why we wanted to have Austin on the show, to go into some depth. And there are some very wonderful people on it, as we described. Dr. Joe Dispenza, dear friend and colleague, whose work I think very highly of. We've had him on A Better World Radio a couple of times, and TV. Debbie Ford, same thing. And want to have Candace Pert on soon. Dr. Peter Senge. They're all truly potent, highly thoughtful people that we can all learn so much from, and I have, and I continue to. So with that said, I want to now introduce you all to another dear friend of mine. His name is Mark Becker, who is the producer of the well-known and renowned expos in New York, from the New York New Life Expo, also held in Fort Lauderdale, both in each place twice a year, as well as this weekend. Mark Becker, are you there?
I am here. How are you?
I am fine, thanks. Welcome to A Better World, my dear friend.
Well, thank you. I don't know of a volunteer meeting. Hold on, say hello.
Hello? I don't know who you are putting on, but I'd rather speak with you.
I know. That was my volunteer meeting. My volunteers.
Okay, very good. Glad to hear that you've got many of them, because you'll need them, because there will be many people at your event. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it's beautiful. I mean, you know, we've been doing the New Life Expo since 1990, and this is the New Life Yoga and Raw Food Expo, which is even more health-oriented. And just whoever comes will meet thousands of people that are into what they're into, you know, like-minded people, you know, showing people how to raise their consciousness, how to meet their maximum potential, how to open up their mind to all possibilities in the health, spiritual, and yoga world.
Beautiful. I mean, I've been attending them. Well, I guess I've actually been giving talks at them or moderating panels at them from their very inception, Mark. And I've watched them
in fact,
grow.
we'll be lecturing Saturday at 5 o'clock.
That's correct. That's correct. And I'm very excited about it. I'm lecturing about holism in one's daily life and understanding the mind-body connection. And you always have these great panels on raw food, on live food, on nutrition, and helping people.
And which panel are you moderating, by the way?
I don't know. The only one I'm actually thinking I'm available for is 4 o'clock on Saturday, Mark.
4 o'clock
Why don't
on
I
Saturday?
start it and you'll take over? What's that?
The 4 o'clock on Saturday
with Victoras Kovinskis, Dr. Robert Sorge. Yes. I couldn't do Friday because I'm going to be out of town. But if I started at the one at 4, you can pick up on it when I go to lecture.
On Sunday?
I'm not going to be around. I don't know if I'm going to be around.
Well, let me tell everybody, first of all, the expo is this weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And it's at the Hotel Pennsylvania, everybody. The Hotel Pennsylvania
Not at
is
the
in
New
New York
Yorker.
City.
Not at the New Yorker, for those of you who know. Yes.
It's not at the Hotel New Yorker. It's at the Hotel Pennsylvania, which is 33rd and 7th. So it's 401 7th Avenue.
Yes.
And, you know, it's all day Friday from 4 to 10, Saturday from 10 to 9, Sunday from 11 to 8. It's pretty inexpensive. In fact, if you volunteer, it's very inexpensive because you can come in for free. But if you don't volunteer, Friday it's $15, Saturday it's $20, Sunday it's $20, it's $35 for all 3 days, it's $30 for 2 days. And the beauty of volunteering is that you'll be doing an incredible service and helping a tremendous amount of people that are into making their lives better. We have the most incredible speakers, the different panels going on, and all this is with the price of admission. Exhibitors and raw food. We have 2 raw food booths. So you can actually experience incredible, fantastic, phenomenal raw food. We have yoga classes going on all day on Friday and Saturday, and lectures and workshops and panels going on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
So there's yoga going on. People can come and just take a yoga class, too, you mean?
Oh, yeah. And they do yoga classes all day on Friday and Saturday.
Yeah.
Now pre-registration is closed, but I think it is still open online. So if people go to newlifeexpo.com, which is www.newlifeexpo, newlifeexpo.com, you can probably still register online tonight
and get the savings, the discount. Yeah. Right, exactly.
Yeah,
and if they want to volunteer, Mark, where do they go? Who do they call?
Well, first call us at the New Life office, which is 516-897-8255. 516-897-0900. 516-897-0900. And you can call and do that. You can email us. You can email me at Mark, M-A-R-K, at newlifemag.com, like New Life Magazine. Online at thenewlifeexpo.com, you can see the whole brochure, who's speaking, what times, what's going on. On Friday night, also, we have an incredible solstice concert. So it's going to be live music, and we're going to celebrate solstice. So at the end of Friday, you can dance, you can have fun.
Beautiful.
It's just a happening. The whole weekend is happening. And
it's a happening, man. It's a happening.
You are there, darling.
Yes, I am.
Everybody, if you haven't seen Mitchell Rabin in person, you should come see Mitchell Rabin in person.
For that alone, you should come to the New Life Expo.
Actually, I'll be doing a yoga class for everybody. It could be for yoga teachers learning how to be a better yoga teacher. It could be for a beginner learning how to be a yogi or yogini. So I'll be doing that sometime this weekend. So you have to come and figure out when. No, I guess I know. I'm gonna be doing it a Saturday at 1. So I'll be there a little bit before you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Mark, you do the best expos that can be found anywhere. They are.
Thank you. You know, it's part of my life.
I know.
Yeah.
People come together. It's truly a celebration. Old friends, new friends. People meet, and it's almost its own dating service, for crying out loud, as well.
I know. People have actually done. They actually have met their husbands there. They met their wives there.
It's true.
You know, I walk through Manhattan, and people come over and say, "Oh, thank you for the expo. It changed my life." And thank you. I met my husband. I met my wife. Yeah.
That's right. It's really true. Business contacts and food that's amazing, and products among some of the exhibitors that are, you don't
we have
find
great
elsewhere.
And great lectures. Yeah, and
really
and more important, you're going to get a lot of information. It's like a smorgasbord of health and information on how to make yourself a better person and how to be healthier.
Exactly. Mark, it's a real gift to our planet, our city, and planet in general. I really appreciate the hard work.
Thank you. And I appreciate you having me on. I have to go back to the volunteer meeting.
Absolutely.
I really do appreciate it.
Good luck.
And thank you. And again, it's 516-897-0900. It's newlifeexpo.com. You can actually just come to the Hotel Pennsylvania, 401 7th Avenue, sleep over for 3 days, meet friends, new friends that you'll probably have forever.
That's right. That's beautiful. Mark, thanks so much for joining us. I wanted to let everybody know, our whole audience, about what you're doing this weekend.
That.
You got it,
friend. I'll see you later.
Soon.
Take care, brother.
I'll see you soon. Okay, great. Bye-bye now. That was Mark Becker, dear friend, long time, who has really been doing these expos, and he's brought them to another level. It's really, really a wonderful alchemy that occurs at these things, literally 4 times a year at this point, 3 or 4 times a year, and we always have a lot of fun. And yes, I am going to be giving a talk at 5 o'clock in Penn North at the Pennsylvania Hotel, 5 o'clock on Saturday. So please join us. This is Mitchell J. Rabin. Thanks again for joining me here. I love all of you. We have a growing base of listeners from the United States, from New York, from around the world. It's very exciting, and I so appreciate your attention. And do get our newsletter, abetterworld.tv, because that will also clue you into who's going to be on the show next, when I'm having guests, that is, and sometimes you are the guest. Sometimes I just want to talk directly with you, the listener, as well as who we have on our TV show. We had last night Saniel Bonder of Waking Down Mutuality and the Human Sun Institute. Brilliant man, author of Ultimaya 1.0. Oh, my God. Some interesting metaphysical sci-fi novel that you should definitely pick up. We have all of that at our website, abetterworld.tv, where you can also purchase portable, handheld water filters. Give up buying bottled water, folks. Be done with it. Say goodbye to feeding the landfill sites across the planet with plastic. We have the solution, and it's right on our website. It's a $30 water filter built into a plastic bottle, but high quality plastic that you will carry around with you for life and have your own high quality filtered water at your bidding. So again, this is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World. Thanks so much for joining us. Next week we'll be having on Eric Pearl of The Reconnection. If you haven't heard Eric speak, this is a chance. Please do it. And know that we have 3 interviews with him on DVD at our Amazon store that you can access by clicking store at that same website, abetterworld.tv. And we'll be interviewing him with his co-author of his latest book called Solomon Speaks. Oh, you do not want to miss that. So again, this weekend, the expo, the Raw Food and Yoga Expo at the Pennsylvania Hotel. If you can make your way to New York City, please do. And if you want to volunteer, Mark has opened up the gates for free. And I'll be speaking at 5 on Saturday and probably moderating a nutritional panel at 4. On that note, thanks again for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Listen to Mozart as we say goodnight.